Rain pounded against the windshield as Isabella's trembling hands gripped the steering wheel. In the rearview mirror, she could see Noah's confused brown eyes staring back at her from the back seat. The 23-year-old woman's face was streaked with tears that mixed with the rainwater dripping from her hair. She had just been evicted again. The third time this year. Her waitress job barely covered food, let alone rent and veterinary bills for a sick dog. The county animal shelter loomed ahead, a gray concrete building that looked as cold as the rain felt. Isabella pulled into the parking lot, and her heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. Noah pressed his wet nose against the window, tail wagging slowly, trusting, always trusting. He had no idea what was about to happen. "I'm so sorry, boy," she whispered, her voice breaking. I can't do this anymore." Isabella opened the back door, and Noah jumped out eagerly, thinking they were going on an adventure. His golden fur was matted from the rain, but his eyes shone with pure love and loyalty. That look, that unconditional devotion, it made everything so much harder. She clipped the worn leash to his collar, the same collar she'd bought at a thrift store 2 years ago when she'd found him abandoned as a puppy behind a dumpster. They walked through the shelter doors together. The smell of disinfectant and wet fur filled her nostrils. A tired-looking woman at the front desk barely glanced up. Isabella's hands shook as she filled out the surrender form. Each word felt like a betrayal. Name, Noah. Age, 2 years. Reason for surrender, financial hardship. Noah sat beside her, leaning against her leg, offering comfort even as she prepared to abandon him. The woman took the leash from Isabella's hands. "We'll take good care of him," she said mechanically, words she'd probably spoken 1,000 times before. Isabella knelt down one last time. Noah licked the tears from her cheeks, his tail wagging, still trusting, still loving. "You're such a good boy," she sobbed, wrapping her arms around his neck. "The best boy. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." She forced herself to stand, to walk away. But as she reached the door, she heard it, a sound that would haunt her for the next decade. Noah's desperate bark. High-pitched, confused, pleading. She turned back and saw him pulling against the leash, straining toward her, not understanding why she was leaving without him. Their eyes met one last time. His looked confused, hurt, but still full of love. Hers were drowning in guilt and regret. The door closed between them, and Isabella ran. She ran through the rain to her car, collapsed against the steering wheel, and screamed. The sound of Noah's barking echoed in her mind, growing fainter as she drove away, but never truly fading. 10 years. That's how long Noah would wait. 10 years of checking every face that walked through the shelter. 10 years of hoping that the woman who saved him would come back. 10 years of loyalty that most humans couldn't imagine. But Isabella didn't know that yet. All she knew was the crushing weight of choosing survival over love. The rain continued to fall, washing away everything except the memory of those trusting brown eyes. Have you ever had to let go of someone you love? Share your story below. 10 years later, Isabella Garcia stood in her veterinary clinic, her hands steady as she sutured a small incision on a tabby cat. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Healing Paws, her own practice, something she'd built from nothing through scholarship, night school, and sheer determination. At 33, she looked different from that broken 23-year-old who had cried in the rain. Her dark hair was pulled back professionally, and her white coat bore her name in elegant embroidery. Dr. Isabella Garcia, DVM. But some wounds never fully heal. "Mommy, can we get ice cream after?" A small voice broke through her concentration. Isabella glanced over at her 5-year-old daughter, Ava, who sat in the corner coloring pictures of dogs and cats. Always dogs and cats. The little girl had her mother's brown eyes and a heart that seemed too big for her small body. "Of course, sweetheart," Isabella smiled, finishing the final stitch. "Just let me close up here." The cat's owner, an elderly woman named Mrs. Peterson, watched with grateful eyes. "You have such gentle hands, Dr. Garcia. Mittens is lucky to have you." If only you knew, Isabella thought, the guilt stirring in her chest like it always did. She had gentle hands now, But once those same hands had signed away a life that depended on her. She had saved hundreds of animals in the past 5 years since opening her clinic, but it never felt like enough. It never erased that one face, those trusting eyes, that desperate bark. She rarely spoke about Noah. Not to her daughter, not to her staff, not even to Mason. Mason Walker burst through the clinic door right on cue, bringing with him the smell of coffee and pastries. Breakfast delivery for the hardest-working vet in Chicago. Her childhood friend had stuck by her through everything: the poverty, the struggle, the shame. He'd helped her move 6 times, lent her money for textbooks, and believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself. Uncle Mason. Ava squealed, abandoning her crayons to run into his arms. "Hey, little bear." He scooped her up, spinning her around. "What are we coloring today?" "Let me guess, more puppies?" "Always puppies." Ava giggled. "Mommy, can we adopt a puppy? Please." The question hit Isabella like a physical blow. Mason caught the flash of pain in her eyes and quickly changed the subject. "How about we let your mom finish with Mittens first, okay? Then we can all get those ice cream cones." Isabella nodded gratefully, focusing back on the cat. But her hands trembled slightly as she removed her gloves. 10 years, and she still couldn't bring herself to adopt another dog. She worked with them every day, healed them, saved them, loved them. But taking one home? That felt like a betrayal. Like trying to replace someone irreplaceable. "You okay?" Mason asked quietly as Ava returned to her coloring. "Just tired," Isabella lied.
It was always the same lie.
The truth was more complicated. She had built a good life, a career, a daughter, stability. She donated to animal shelters anonymously, volunteered at free clinics, and never turned away an animal in need, regardless of the owner's ability to pay. It was penance, though she never said so aloud. But she avoided one place like a plague: the Riverside County Animal Shelter. The place where she'd left Noah a decade ago. She'd driven past it exactly once in 10 years, and the panic attack had been so severe she'd had to pull over. Mason found her hyperventilating on the side of the road, unable to explain what was wrong. Some ghosts don't rest easy. As Isabella packed up for the day, Ava held up her latest drawing. "Look, Mommy. It's you and me and a puppy." In the picture, 3 stick figures stood under a smiling sun. The puppy was golden-colored, with a big smile. Something about it made Isabella's breath catch. "It's beautiful, baby," she whispered, kissing the top of her daughter's head. If only she knew that very soon, that drawing would become more prophetic than either of them could imagine. 10 years of separation were about to end in the most unexpected way. But first there would be fire. What's the strongest bond you've had with a pet? Tell us. 8 years ago, 2 years after the abandonment, Isabella had been walking home from her night shift at the diner. It was 2 a.m. and the Chicago streets were mostly empty. She'd just finished a double shift, her feet aching, her body exhausted. College textbooks weighed heavy in her backpack. She was studying to become a veterinary technician, the first step toward her dream. She never saw the man following her. The alley was dark when he grabbed her, shoving her against the brick wall. His hand covered her mouth, and she smelled alcohol on his breath. "Wallet. Now," he hissed, pressing something sharp against her ribs. Terror froze her vocal cords.
But then, the sound.
A low, threatening growl that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The man spun around, and Isabella saw him, a large golden dog, matted and dirty, standing at the alley entrance. His teeth were bared, his stance protective, and his eyes blazed with fierce determination. For a split second, Isabella's heart stopped. Those eyes looked familiar. "Noah," she whispered, though it seemed impossible. The dog launched forward with a ferocious bark. The attacker released Isabella and ran, dropping his knife. The dog chased him for several yards before returning, the aggression melting away as he approached her. He limped slightly, favoring his left front paw, and his ribs showed through his dirty coat. Isabella sank to the ground, and the dog came to her, pressing his head against her chest. She wrapped her arms around him, sobbing. "Noah, is it really you?" She checked, No collar, no tags, but the scar above his right eye, that was Noah's scar from when he'd run into a fence as a puppy. Oh God, what happened to you? How did you? The next 2 months were bittersweet magic. Isabella couldn't afford to keep him. She lived in a tiny studio apartment that prohibited pets, barely made enough for herself, but she couldn't let him go either. She snuck him in each night, fed him from her own meager portions, and used her employee discount at the veterinary clinic where she worked part-time to treat his injuries and malnutrition. Noah never left her side. He waited outside her classes, outside the diner, outside everywhere. He'd somehow escaped the shelter. She later learned there'd been a transfer to another facility, and he'd bolted during the chaos, and he'd found her. Miles across the city, he'd found her. "You're supposed to be safe in the shelter," she'd whisper to him at night as he slept curled against her. "Not out here protecting me. Not starving on the streets looking for me." But Mason had noticed. Her landlord had noticed. And one cold November morning, Isabella woke to an eviction notice slipped under her door. Pets strictly prohibited. She had 1 week. She tried everything. Begged for extensions, searched for pet-friendly apartments she couldn't afford, considered dropping out of school. Nothing worked. The guilt from 2 years ago came flooding back, multiplied by the knowledge that Noah had saved her life, had found her against all odds, and she still couldn't give him a home. The morning she took him back to the shelter, Noah fought. He'd never fought before, but this time he knew. He dug his paws into the ground, whined, pulled against the leash. "I'm sorry," Isabella sobbed. "I'm so sorry. I love you, but I can't. I just can't." The shelter worker, a different one this time, a young man with kind eyes named Marcus, took the leash gently. "We'll take care of him," he promised. "He'll find a good home." But as Isabella walked away, Marcus whispered something to Noah that she didn't hear. "She'll come back, boy. They always come back." Noah's howl followed her out the door. It was a sound of pure heartbreak, a sound that said he understood betrayal now. That was 6 years ago. And in those 6 years, Isabella had never stopped hearing that howl. It played in her nightmares. It echoed when she saved other animals. It reminded her that sometimes love isn't enough when survival demands sacrifice. She never knew that Noah had never stopped waiting. That every day for 8 years total, he'd watched the shelter entrance, hoping to see her face. That Marcus had grown attached to the loyal golden dog who refused to give up hope. The universe was keeping score. And soon, it would demand payment or offer redemption. Have you been saved by an animal? Comment your miracle. Isabella stood in her clinic after hours, staring at the wall covered with photos of successful adoptions and recovered patients. Dozens of happy faces, both human and animal. Success stories she'd helped create. But there was one photo that existed only in her mind, and it haunted her constantly. Noah's face on that rainy day. The confusion in his eyes. "Why are you still here?" Mason asked, leaning against the doorframe. He'd come back to pick up his jacket and found her standing motionless in the dark. "Just thinking," Isabella replied, her voice distant. "About him?"
She didn't need to ask who.
Mason was the only person who knew the whole story. The abandonment, the miraculous reunion, the second surrender. He'd held her while she cried for weeks afterward. He'd never judged her, but he'd also never let her forget. "It's been 8 years, Bella," he said softly, using the nickname only he was allowed. "Maybe it's time to forgive yourself."
How?
The word came out as a broken whisper. "I left him twice, Mason.
Twice.
He saved my life, and I put him back in that place." "What kind of person does that?" "A person who is drowning," Mason said firmly, walking over to stand beside her. "You were 25, broke, barely surviving. You made impossible choices in impossible situations." Isabella shook her head. "Everyone says that, but it doesn't change what I did. It doesn't change that somewhere out there, he probably hated me. Or worse, he probably forgot me and found someone who actually deserved him." The thought of Noah happy with another family should have brought relief, but instead, it twisted like a knife. She wanted him to be loved, but the selfish part of her, The part she was ashamed of wanted him to remember her, to somehow know she'd never forgotten him. "I drive past animal shelters and I panic," Isabella admitted. "I can't even look at golden retrievers without feeling sick. Ava keeps asking for a puppy, and all I can think is that I don't deserve one, that I'll fail again." Mason put his arm around her shoulders. "You've saved hundreds of animals, Bella. You give free care to people who can't afford it. You've donated thousands to shelters. When does that start to count?" "When it doesn't feel like I'm trying to buy forgiveness," she answered honestly. That was the core of it. Every animal she saved was wrapped up in guilt. Every late night at the clinic, every donation, every volunteer hour. It all served the same purpose: to quiet the voice in her head that said she was a bad person. A person who abandoned loyalty. A person who didn't deserve redemption. She thought of Ava, sleeping peacefully at home with the babysitter. Her daughter, who drew pictures of puppies and begged for a dog of her own. Isabella wanted to give her that joy, that companionship. But the fear was paralyzing. What if she failed again? What if circumstances changed? What if she proved, once more, that she couldn't be trusted? "I looked him up once," Isabella confessed, her voice barely audible. 2 years ago. Called the shelter to see if he'd been adopted." Mason straightened, surprised. "What did they say?" "I hung up before anyone answered." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I was too afraid to know. Too afraid he was gone. Too afraid he was still there waiting." Both possibilities were unbearable. Mason pulled her into a hug. "Life gave you hell, Bella.
You survived.
That counts for something." But as Isabella drove home that night, the guilt sat heavy in her chest. She'd built a good life from the ashes of poverty, but the foundation felt unstable, like it was built on bones she'd tried to bury. She'd run from that shelter for a decade, run from the memory, run from the possibility of facing what she'd done. She had no idea that running time was about to end, that fate was preparing to drag her back to the place she'd avoided for 10 years. That fire and smoke would force a confrontation she'd spent a decade trying to prevent. Some debts can only be paid in person. Some ghosts demand to be faced. What guilt do you carry from your past? Share if you dare. At the Riverside County Animal Shelter, Marcus stood in the outdoor kennel area, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and purple. In his 10 years working there, he'd seen thousands of dogs come and go. Most were adopted within weeks or months. Some, sadly, were never chosen. But one dog had become something of a legend among the staff. Noah, the golden retriever in Kennel 12. "Still waiting, isn't he?" Sarah, the new volunteer, asked as she approached. She'd only been there 3 months, but she'd already heard the story. Marcus nodded, watching Noah sit by the fence, his eyes fixed on the parking lot entrance. The same position he'd held for 8 years, every single day. Never stops. Morning to night, he watches that gate. "Has anyone tried to adopt him?" "Dozens," Marcus replied. "Good families too, but he won't go. The first few times, we thought he was just scared. But then we realized he's waiting for someone specific." Sarah's eyes welled up. "The woman who surrendered him?" "Twice," Marcus confirmed. "First time, he was just a pup. Came back 2 years later, beaten up but protective. Saved her life, from what I could piece together. She brought him back crying, saying she had no choice." He paused. "I believed her. You could see it was destroying her." Noah had aged in the 8 years since that second surrender. His muzzle had grayed, his movements were slower, but his eyes remained alert, hopeful. Every car that pulled in brought his head up, his tail up, his whole body tense with anticipation. And every time it wasn't her, something inside him seemed to dim just a little. But he never stopped hoping. "We tried placing him with a foster," Marcus continued. "Thought maybe getting him out of here would help. He escaped and came back within 6 hours. Sat at the front door until we let him in. After that, we stopped trying." The shelter director had wanted to mark Noah as unadoptable and move him to a sanctuary, but Marcus had argued against it. "What if she comes back?" he'd said. "He needs to be here. She needs to be able to find him." So Noah stayed. He became the shelter mascot, the story volunteers told on hard days when hope felt scarce. He reminded them why they did this work, because loyalty like his deserved to be honored, even when it seemed foolish. Especially when it seemed foolish. Does he ever play? Sarah asked. Or does he just wait? He plays with the other dogs sometimes, Marcus said. Lets the kids pet him during school visits. He's gentle, patient. Perfect dog, really. But yeah, mostly he waits. I've never seen anything like it. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed Sarah photos he'd taken over the years. Noah at 3 years old, still young and hopeful. Noah at 5, his eyes sadder but determined. Noah at 8, graying but steadfast. And finally Noah now, at 10 years old, older, slower, but still watching that gate. It breaks my heart, Sarah whispered. Mine too, Marcus admitted. But it also inspires me. If a dog can be that loyal, that committed, that hopeful after being abandoned twice, what does that say about the capacity for love? For forgiveness. That evening, as the shelter closed, Marcus stopped by Noah's kennel one last time. The old dog had finally come inside, lying on his worn blanket. But his head was still positioned toward the door, always toward the door. She's out there, boy, Marcus whispered. I don't know if she'll come back, but I know she hasn't forgotten you. Nobody could forget love like yours. Noah's tail thumped once against the floor. What neither of them knew was that in less than 48 hours, everything would change. That fire would tear through the shelter. That Isabella would be forced to face the place she'd avoided for a decade. That 10 years of waiting would finally end. The universe works in mysterious ways. Sometimes it takes catastrophe to create miracles. Sometimes love requires fire to forge redemption. Noah laid his head on his paws and closed his eyes. But even in sleep, his ears remained alert, listening for the one voice he'd never forgotten. The voice that had said, "Good boy," with such love. The voice that had cried, "I'm sorry," with such pain. He was still waiting. He would always wait. Have you seen loyalty that moved you? Tell us below. The call came at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night. Isabella was already in bed, finally drifting off after reading Ava a bedtime story, when her phone lit up with Mason's name. Fire at the Riverside shelter, he said without preamble. Major. They're asking for any vets in the area to help with injured animals. Isabella's blood turned to ice. Riverside? Yeah, the county one. I know you don't. She was already out of bed, pulling on clothes with shaking hands. I'm going. The drive took 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. Her hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly they ached. The Riverside County Animal Shelter. The place she'd avoided for 10 years. The place where she'd left Noah twice. And now it was burning. Please let him be adopted, she prayed silently. Please let him not be there anymore. Please let him be safe in some loving home. Anywhere but there. But in her heart, she knew. Some part of her had always known. Noah had never left. He'd been waiting all this time. The orange glow appeared on the horizon before she reached the shelter. Smoke billowed into the night sky, illuminated by the flashing lights of fire trucks. When Isabella pulled into the parking lot, the heat hit her face like a physical force. The main building was engulfed in flames. The kennels were smoking, and firefighters were dragging hoses while volunteers tried to evacuate terrified animals. The sound was deafening, barking, howling, the roar of fire, shouted commands. Isabella's medical training kicked in automatically. She ran toward the chaos, identifying herself as a veterinarian to the coordinator. We've got about 40 animals out, the woman shouted over the noise. But there might be more in the East Wing. It's too dangerous to send anyone back in. Isabella's eyes snapped to the burning East Wing. Kennel 12 was in the East Wing. Any golden retrievers? The question came out strangled. What? Golden retrievers. Did any golden retrievers get out? The coordinator checked her clipboard, squinting in the firelight. 2 goldens accounted for a wait. Marcus said something about a dog that wouldn't leave Kennel 12. He tried to get him out, but... Isabella didn't hear the rest. She was already running toward the east wing, ignoring the shouts behind her. The heat was incredible, the smoke choking. Her eyes streamed with tears. From the smoke, she told herself. Only from the smoke. A firefighter grabbed her arm. "Ma'am, you can't. There's a dog in there," Isabella screamed. "Kennel 12. He's been there for 10 years waiting for me, and I will not let him die thinking I abandoned him again." The truth of her words struck her like lightning. 10 years. She'd known all along, hadn't she? Deep down, some part of her had known Noah had never left. That he was still there, still waiting, still hoping. And she'd let him wait because she was too afraid to face what she'd done. Not anymore. The firefighter's grip loosened in surprise, and Isabella pulled free. She grabbed a wet blanket someone had dropped and wrapped it around her head. The east wing door was partially collapsed, but there was a gap. She squeezed through, the heat immediately overwhelming. "Noah," she called into the smoke. "Noah, where are you?" For a moment, nothing but the crackle of flames and the groan of weakening structures. Then faint, so faint she almost missed it, a bark. Not a strong, healthy bark. A weak, rasping sound that spoke of smoke inhalation and fear. But also hope. "I'm coming," Isabella shouted, following the sound. "I'm here, boy. I'm finally here." She found Kennel 12 through pure instinct and memory. The door was jammed, twisted by heat. Through the smoke, she saw him, a golden shape lying on the floor, too weak to stand but alert enough to bark again when he saw her. "Noah," she sobbed, wrenching at the door. The metal burned her hands, but she didn't care. "Hold on, baby. Hold on." The door gave way with a screech. Isabella crawled into the kennel, gathering the dog into her arms. He was heavier than she remembered, grayer, older. But his eyes looked up at her with recognition, so profound it stole her breath. He knew her. After 10 years, after everything, he knew her. "I'm sorry," Isabella whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry I left you. I never stopped thinking about you. Never stopped loving you. I was just so scared." Noah licked her face weakly, his tail moving just slightly. Forgiveness in that small gesture. Behind her, the ceiling groaned ominously. "No time." Isabella wrapped Noah in the wet blanket, lifted him. He was so much heavier than she expected, and ran. Her lungs burned. Her eyes could barely see through the smoke. But she ran like she should have run toward him 10 years ago instead of away. They burst out of the building just as a section of the roof collapsed behind them. Firefighters rushed to help. Paramedics appeared with oxygen. Isabella laid Noah on the grass, refusing to let go of his paw as the emergency vet examined him. Smoke inhalation, possible burns on his paws, dehydration, the vet reported. But he's stable. Incredibly, he's going to make it. Isabella collapsed beside Noah, her face pressed against his singed fur. "Of course you're going to make it," she whispered. "Because you've been waiting for me. And I'm never leaving you again. Never." Around them, chaos continued. But in that small bubble of grass and reunion, time stopped. 10 years of separation, guilt, and waiting collapsed into one perfect moment of recognition. Love hadn't died. Loyalty hadn't faded. Some bonds transcend time, transcend mistakes, transcend everything. Have you lost hope, only to find it again? Share your moment. The emergency veterinary hospital was a flurry of activity as Isabella burst through the doors carrying Noah in her arms. The wet blanket had fallen away, revealing the extent of his injuries. Singed paws, patches of burned fur, his breathing labored from smoke inhalation. But his eyes never left her face. "I need help here," Isabella shouted, her voice hoarse from smoke and emotion. Severe smoke inhalation, possible internal burns, vitals weak. Dr. Chun, the night shift emergency vet, rushed over with a gurney. "Dr. Garcia? What are you?" "This is Noah," Isabella said, and her voice broke on his name. He's everything. Please." Something in her tone made Dr. Chun move faster. They rushed Noah into an examination room. hooking him up to oxygen immediately. Isabella stood beside the table, one hand on Noah's head, the other clutching the metal railing so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Isabella," Dr. Chin said gently, "you need to let me work. I'm not leaving him." The words came out as a fierce declaration. Not again. Never again. Dr. Chin recognized the look in her colleague's eyes, the same look they all got when a case became personal. He nodded. "Okay, but you need to trust me. And you need to step back enough to let me do my job." Isabella forced herself to take one step back, then another. But her eyes never left Noah's face. The next 3 hours were the longest of Isabella's life. Blood tests revealed smoke in Noah's lungs, but no permanent damage. X-rays showed his old ribs, healed fractures from his time on the streets years ago. Burns on his paw pads would require weeks of treatment. Dehydration and malnutrition suggested he hadn't been eating well, probably refusing food as he often did, according to the shelter records they'd accessed. "He's been waiting," Isabella whispered to Dr. Chin. "For 10 years. He stopped eating because he thought I was coming back." Marcus arrived at 3 a.m., still covered in soot from helping at the shelter. He found Isabella in the observation room, sitting on the floor beside Noah's recovery kennel, her hand reaching through the bars to touch his fur. "You came," Marcus said softly. Isabella looked up, tears streaming freely now. "You knew. All these years, you knew he was waiting." "I did." Marcus sat down beside her. "I always hoped you'd come back. I never gave up on that. Just like he never gave up on you. Why didn't you call me? Find me somehow? Tell me he was here?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Would you have come? 2 years ago? 5 years ago? Or would the guilt have buried you? Some things, we have to be ready for them." He pulled out his phone and showed Isabella the photos. Noah through the years, always waiting. The progression of hope to sadness to resignation to stubborn determination. The gray creeping into his muzzle. The faithful position by the gate, day after day, year after year. "Oh God," Isabella sobbed. All this time I was building my life, and he was just waiting. How can he forgive me? How can he not?" Marcus replied, "That's what love is. Not keeping score. Not holding grudges. Just loving. Even when it hurts. Even when it seems hopeless." As if hearing them, Noah shifted in his kennel. His eyes opened, finding Isabella immediately. His tail thumped weakly against the blanket. "Hey, boy," Isabella whispered, pressing her face against the bars. "I'm right here. Not going anywhere. We're going to heal together, okay? Both of us." Dr. Chin appeared with an update. "He's responding well to treatment. The oxygen levels are improving. He's not out of danger yet, but he's fighting. He's a fighter." "He always was," Isabella said. "He fought to protect me, fought to find me, fought to survive on the streets, fought to keep hoping." Her voice grew stronger. "And I'm going to fight for him now. Whatever he needs. Whatever it takes." Over the next 48 hours, Isabella barely left the hospital. Mason brought her changes of clothes. Ava came to visit, her small face pressed against the viewing window, whispering encouragement to the brave doggy. The story of the rescue had spread. The veterinarian who'd run into a burning building to save a dog who'd waited a decade for her return. News vans appeared outside the hospital. Social media exploded with the story. #Noah's Loyalty started trending. Donations poured in for the shelter's rebuilding fund. But Isabella ignored it all. Her world had narrowed to one thing: the golden dog who'd loved her unconditionally, who'd waited impossibly, who'd forgiven the unforgivable. On the 3rd day, Noah stood up, weak, bandaged, but standing. And when Isabella opened the kennel door, he walked, carefully, painfully, but determinedly, into her arms. "Good boy," she whispered, the same words she'd said 10 years ago. "Such a good boy." Noah pressed his head against her chest, right over her heart. The place he'd always belonged. This time, nothing would separate them. Not poverty. Not fear. Not guilt. They'd both been through fire, literal and metaphorical, and emerged on the other side. Scarred, maybe. Changed, definitely. But together. Finally, impossibly, miraculously together. When did you fight for someone's life? Comment your fight. The moment Isabella brought Noah home for the first time in 10 years, Ava squealed with pure joy. The small apartment Isabella had worked so hard to afford suddenly felt complete. Noah walked slowly through the door, his bandaged paws leaving careful prints on the hardwood floor, his nose working to absorb every scent of this new place that smelled like Isabella. "Mommy, is this the puppy from my drawing?" Ava asked, her eyes wide with wonder. Isabella's breath caught. She looked at her daughter, then at Noah, then back at the drawing still stuck to the refrigerator, 3 stick figures and a golden dog under a smiling sun. "Yes, baby," she whispered. "This is our Noah." The media attention had been overwhelming. The story of Noah's decade-long wait had gone viral. News outlets called it the most loyal dog in the world. Social media users shared it millions of times with crying emojis and heart emojis. Someone had started a GoFundMe for Noah's medical expenses, and it had raised over $100,000 in 3 days, far more than needed, with the excess designated for the shelter's reconstruction. But it was the letters that undid Isabella.
Thousands of them.
Handwritten, typed, emailed, posted. People sharing their own stories of pets they'd had to surrender due to poverty, illness, homelessness. People who understood that sometimes love isn't enough when you're drowning. People who saw themselves in her story and found permission to forgive themselves. One letter from a single mother in Ohio read, "I gave up my dog when I lost my job. I thought I was a monster. Your story showed me I can still be a good person." Another from a veteran in Texas. "I left my dog behind when I was deployed. I never thought I'd forgive myself, but Noah's loyalty gives me hope." Isabella read every letter, sometimes through tears, sometimes with Ava curled up beside her, asking why Mommy was crying. Each story was a mirror, reflecting her own pain and her own redemption. She began responding to as many as she could, offering words of comfort, sharing resources for pet retention programs, and encouraging them to visit their local shelters. Noah, lying at her feet, seemed to sense the shift in her. His tail would thump softly, as if approving of her healing. One evening, Mason stopped by with pizza, as was their tradition. He watched Isabella sorting through letters, a small smile on her face. "You're different," he said. "Lighter, somehow." I think I'm starting to forgive myself," Isabella admitted. "Not completely. Maybe never completely. But Noah forgave me. And these people, they're forgiving themselves because of him. How can I not try?" Mason nodded, his eyes soft.
He's more than a dog, Bella.
"He's a miracle." Isabella looked at Noah, now asleep on his new orthopedic bed, a gift from a donor inspired by his story. "He always was," she said quietly. The world had changed because of one dog's loyalty. And in that small apartment, with Ava's laughter and Noah's steady breathing, Isabella felt something she hadn't felt in a decade. Peace. Not perfect, not complete, but enough to start healing. Enough to believe that love could overcome even the deepest wounds. What story helped you forgive yourself? Share below. Isabella adjusted Noah's new collar, a soft blue leather with a tag engraved, "Noah Garcia, forever home." The 11-year-old golden retriever walked slowly beside her in the park, his bandaged paws still tender, but his tail wagged with a joy that seemed to defy time. Ava ran ahead, clutching a tennis ball, laughing as she called for Noah to play. For the first time in a decade, Isabella felt a lightness in her chest, as if the weight of guilt was finally beginning to lift. "Look, Mommy." He caught it, Ava shouted, as Noah, with gentle effort, grabbed the ball and trotted back to her. His brown eyes sparkled, no longer fixed on a shelter gate, but on his new family. Isabella smiled, though tears came, as they always did. This time, they were tears of gratitude. Mason joined them in the park, carrying a makeshift picnic. "Have you thought about telling the whole story?" he asked, spreading a blanket on the grass. "People are crazy about Noah. You could help so many others carrying that same guilt." Isabella hesitated. The idea of sharing her journey publicly, the abandonments, the reunion, the guilt, still terrified her. But the thousands of letters kept coming. Stories from people who, like her, had faced impossible choices. People who needed to hear that redemption was possible. "I don't know if I'm ready," she admitted, watching Noah lie beside Ava, who stroked his graying muzzle. "But maybe I owe it to him. And to them." That night, Isabella sat at her laptop, Ava asleep beside her and Noah snoring softly on the rug. She began to write, not just about Noah, but about her own journey, the poverty, the despair, the love that saved her, and the guilt that nearly destroyed her. Each word was painful but liberating. She titled the piece, "10 Years of Waiting, The Story of Noah and Me." When she clicked publish on a local animal blog, she had no idea those words would change lives. Within days, the post went viral, sparking a wave of donations to shelters, adoptions, and even a national campaign called Noah's Hope to support pet owners facing financial hardship. But for Isabella, the real miracle was there, in that quiet moment. Noah by her side, Ava dreaming of puppies, and the promise to never run from the past again. What would you do to turn guilt into hope? Share your idea. Isabella knelt beside Noah at the rebuilt Riverside County Animal Shelter, her hand resting on his blue collar engraved with Noah Garcia, Forever Home. The plaque at Noah's Corner, a place of hope, gleamed in the sunlight. Ava ran up, clutching her drawing of their family under a rainbow, and hugged Noah tightly as he licked her face, making her giggle. Isabella's eyes met Noah's, calm, content, finally home. No more waiting. Just love, forgiveness, and a family complete. The past was healed, the future theirs. Marcus, now shelter director, spoke to the crowd at the grand reopening. "Noah taught us that true love never gives up," he said, pointing to the dog. "And Isabella showed us redemption is possible." The crowd cheered, but Isabella just held Ava's hand and Noah's leash, feeling whole. The Noah's Hope campaign grew, helping struggling pet owners and boosting adoptions nationwide. Isabella spoke at schools, sharing her story of guilt and healing, inspiring others to forgive themselves. But her best moments were with Noah, park walks, couch snuggles, Ava laughing as he chased soap bubbles. Under a faint rainbow after a light rain, Isabella whispered, "Thank you, Noah, for teaching me to come home." If Noah and Isabella's story touched your heart, subscribe now, hit the bell, and share it with someone who needs hope. Drop a comment. What bond has changed your life? Smash that like button to support Noah's legacy. Join us in spreading stories that heal and inspire. Thank you for being here.